Welcome everybody. We're just waiting for everyone to join us, and you've come to the right place. CIPS ANZ webinar, Leadership Series, how are you managing and monitoring your compliance requirements? And this is kindly sponsored by Coupa and FourPL. So settle back, make sure that you're chatting to us today. Get onto the chat box and take the panelists and attendees, lock that down and tell us where you're all from. We've always got people from so many lands across the region and across the globe joining us. So do tell us where you're calling from or joining from. Settle in. We'll be starting in just a moment. We will be starting in just a moment. Again, use the chat box, tell us where you're from, and make sure you take the panelists and attendees to let everybody know where you're joining us from. Again, you've come to the CIPS ANZ webinar. It's a leadership series. How are you managing and monitoring your compliance requirements? Kindly sponsored by Coupa and FourPL. Looking forward to today's one. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome everybody. You've joined the CIPS ANZ webinar Leadership Series, and it's all about how are you managing and monitoring your compliance requirements, kindly sponsored by Coupa and FourPL. I'd just like to let everybody know that this webinar is currently being recorded and you'll get a copy of it sometime next week. But firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we meet today. I, in fact, join you from Melbourne, this land belonging to the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also like to extend my respects to our friends and colleagues across the Tasman. Tēnā koukou, tēnā koukou, tēnā koukou katoa. Welcome everybody. In fact, welcome to 150 registered attendees today, and that's people from all over the region and further afield. My name's Sharon Morris, and I'm really delighted to be welcoming and representing the professional body as the General Manager for CIPS Australia and New Zealand. So thanks again for joining us on this leadership series. For those of you who don't know us, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, CIPS, is your global professional body for procurement and supply professions. Not only are we dedicated to promoting best practice and continuous improvement in professional standards, but we're also dedicated to raising awareness of the contribution that procurement and supply management can make to organisations and really to the community at large. We're here to support you. That is, we're here to support procurement professionals through your professional journey. And with that support comes knowledge. And today's webinar is just one way that we're sharing that knowledge. But CIPS is also your gateway to connections. That's networks, being part of a procurement community. And now more than ever, as some of us are in a higher isolation than others, but now more than ever, we need to remain connected. So I encourage you to join in the conversation through the CIPS LinkedIn groups. Attend a branch event, so see the details on the website, or why not become a member if you're not already. But without further ado, allow me to introduce our panel moderator for this webinar. We welcome back Chris Poulton, our webinar moderator for today. Chris leads the FourPL procurement business and has over 25 years senior management experience in the IT industry. His experience includes procurement, finance, supply chain, M&A, and shared service engagements. We welcome you back, Chris, and we're delighted to have you moderate today's webinar. So I'm going to hand right over to you. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Sharon, and again, thanks CIPS for the opportunity for us to, for Coupa and FourPL to facilitate this. I think to kick off today's events, we were going to run a very short audience poll, and we might pick up on that in the Q&A. So without, most of you should have a pop-up on your screen with poll 1, and it's a single answer poll. So we'll just allow 30 seconds or so for everyone to complete that. And then once we've done that, we'll have a quick look at the results, and then we'll jump into the meat and potatoes and start grilling the panel. So interesting to see how obviously everyone's different challenges across the compliance framework, and depending on what your background is, where that comes from. So no definitive standouts, actually. Interesting. The obvious one is regulation and legislation, which we're all bound by the non-fun stuff. Supply chain transparency gets a short lead, and then managing data across multiple systems. And I think that's probably one of the areas where we're trying to stay on top of compliance on an ongoing basis. And down the bottom, sustainability, and then lastly, software. So people are not really looking for technology at this point, but just trying to make sure that they're staying on top of things by the look of it. Okay, so as Sharon mentioned earlier, this webinar is being recorded, so a couple of housekeeping things. We will take questions, and we'll go through some panel questions with the panelists. Once we've done that, we'll allow for time, and certainly look to have plenty of time to address your questions. If we don't get to any questions, we will post-webinar get the panelists to answer and circulate those and make them available. So I know the previous ones we've done, we've had quite a lot of questions come in, and so on the basis of that, we're just going to make sure we can get through them. All attendees will be muted, and so the channel for interaction is through the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. And without any further ado, I will jump into introducing our panelists. So we can just jump on to the next slide. With us, we've got three panelists coming from a diverse sort of range of backgrounds. So I'll start off with Sue Toso, who's Director of Strategic Sourcing at Brookfield Asset Management. Welcome, Sue. Good to have you on board today. David Bygrave, who's Head of Procurement at the Volkswagen Group in Australia, and also has carriage across Audi from a procurement perspective. And last but not least, from across the pond is Phil Foti, who's a Director of Product Strategy and Innovation at Coupa, and he'll bring some additional global perspective and some technology perspective to the conversation. So that's where we'll land. Just quickly trying to check if we've got. Okay. So we'll kick off on the questions and move forward. Jump into, so David, I'm not sure if you want to put your camera on and Phil and join the panel together with Sue. Great. So we'll kick off with you, David. So compliance is generally quite a broad area, covers a lot of topics from risk, regulatory, audit, depending on which dimension you're coming from, whether we're out of the CFO side, audit, etc. Just keen to understand where you've made the greatest inroads in the past 12 months, and where you feel you need to go in the next 12 months, and whether COVID's changed anything in that aspect.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, for us, as you say, compliance is a very, very broad topic, covering a number of different functions and roles within our business. And I guess where I can speak from a place of knowledge is around the procurement side of things and the supply chain side. So I think one of the key focuses that we've had as a group, locally and internationally, has really been around driving a corporate culture of integrity and compliance. And I think this is sort of a corporate culture shift for us in terms of making sure that compliance is everyone's responsibility within an organisation. It's not a team, it's not an individual, it's not a functions role, and it's sort of an operating modus operandi of how we should operate our business. And I think for us, it's been a really big success in the last 12 months around sort of demystifying what compliance means and making it relevant to everyone within the organisation. So for us, it's been quite empowering. I think where compliance had traditionally sat, the perception of it was that it sat as a policy or it sat as a a checklist or a procedure at the end of a process. We're now sort of sharing that responsibility within the business and sort of giving people the freedom and flexibility to operate as long as they operate within sort of certain parameters, which has been really a key focus for us. And I think we've had a lot of success in sort of that culture shift. COVID, I think, really brought that home for us and probably sped up that process for us as well. I think we're not alone. I think one of the things that has come out of this has been the importance of corporate culture, and it's been the importance of having a great deal of trust with your employees and with your organisation, not just to do your work within the four walls of the office, but to also be able to do the work from home and to operate in sort of unconventional ways. And I think for us, the focus that we put on that corporate culture of compliance and integrity has really come home to nest over the COVID period. And I think it's really stood us in good stead. I think we've seen an increase in productivity and to a lot of degrees an increase in the agility of the workforce as well, which has sort of been hand in hand off the back of what we've been focusing on the last 12 months.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. Moving on to, I guess, the same question to you in terms of where you've been focusing in the last 12 months and where you see the focus moving in the next 12 months.
I think that, so the consistent with what David's saying, it's really part of the Brookfield DNA from a value perspective, making sure that we have compliance in everything that we do and how we operate ourselves. I think that for us really have been about sustaining the value that we have and making sure that there is complete visibility in it. So one of the things, our supply chain and our onboarding and how we've been operating, COVID or otherwise, I think we've actually been helped in a little way by COVID, because there's been a greater reliance on those processes and those workflows. And as David said as well, we've been equally productive, if not more so. We've been able to make inroads into things that we may not have otherwise been able to focus on. So I think for us, the nature of what we do, we're a very diverse and disparate sort of business. But our workflows and our processes are automated, and being able to turn things around and have it as a natural visibility of what we do, I think that's been a focus. We have been trying to focus on how we manage that compliance, how we ensure visibility to that. And the nature of our business and the users of our systems mean that we've actually been able to work a little bit more effectively whilst continuing to deliver the same values and processes and corporate and legal obligations that we have to do in the first place.
Yeah, and I think certainly with the distribution of work into remote working, as you say, it becomes more important than ever that we embed it in culture and have a compliance culture as a preventative rather than trying to take sticks with processes. Education is always a much better approach and building it into the culture. So that's great.
It is, sorry, Chris. These standards processes, automation has enabled a lot, and the ability to translate that automation into something that is logical and makes sense for the users is actually really important. So it's the automation of what we do, but that gives us the visibility to ensure that we're doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think touching on that as well, I think that if you have sort of the compliance culture within your business, it actually enables it to be, enables more agility, it enables you to move quicker, because I think where compliance is sometimes perceived as a roadblock is where compliance is coming in at the end of a process or at the end of a project. Whereas if we're doing the right thing from the start of the project and everyone's heading in the right direction, it actually enables us to have a greater level of trust within the organisation with our suppliers and make decisions quicker and move faster, which I think is extremely relevant in the current times where we need to make decisions quickly and we need to move quickly. So I think, yeah, COVID has had some silver linings in some instances within corporate culture as well.
Yeah, certainly challenged the ability to change quickly and make decisions quickly. There's no doubt about that. And I think in your industry in particular, there was some significant changes came pretty quickly. So that's great. I'll move over, and Phil's been sitting there very patiently and quietly. So we'll give you a chance to contribute now. So Phil, I guess for me that one of the areas is sustainability compliance, and looking at that has been on the table and cards for some time, and there's other things moving. How do we make sure we keep the focus on that whilst moving to through some of the current changes around, supply chain procurement compliance?
Yeah, great question, Chris. And I'll speak on behalf of not only Coupa, but dozens of customers, global customers that I've been speaking with, especially lately. So if you think about the last several months, diversity and inclusion is a big topic. Obviously, sustainability, corporate responsibility has been front and center. And when you mix that with procurement, sometimes we've got opposing forces. Let's say being sustainable, or do we drive savings through the supply chain? With the pandemic, staying in business and being compliant versus being sustainable doesn't always work together. So we're in a very interesting place right now. In our space, in the procurement and spend management space, these three areas, sustainability, compliance, and procurement, are sometimes siloed. And key to what's behind all that is, to Sue's and David's point, is visibility. And sometimes that means you need data for visibility. So data has been very important. So the real trick for us, we're helping customers trying to merge these two. So take sustainability, compliance, and risk data and make sure that's in the same place as your business processes, as sourcing, procurement, contracting, risk, and supplier management, and make sure that's sticky going forward. So it's going to be great if some of the sustainability gains over the last several months will remain in place, but that's hard to do when you're trying to stay in business. So for us, it's giving our customers the levers and the spigots that they've always tried to implement with savings and efficiencies. It's trying to apply those to sustainability and corporate responsibility, diversity and inclusion, and bringing all of that data in one place. So some examples would be, merging diversity data and inclusion data, and it's important in your part of the world as well as here in the US, making sure that people have that information at their fingertips, making sure that when you buy and source and contract, that information, and including risk and resilience and compliance information, is all in one place. A perfect example in Australia, where our customers are working with this today, is making sure that you're in compliance with Modern Slavery Act data, and you have that information at your fingertips when you're working with a supplier, whether it's sourcing and engaging with them, or you're looking to onboard more suppliers. So having the visibility, the data, and the business processes across, regardless of what type of spend, is where we've been helping a lot of customers. And even though the pandemic's got an interesting twist on it, when things loosen up, they'll be able to turn those spigots and levers accordingly. And without automation and digitization in the data, all of that is manual. You have to do another manual shift versus just flipping a lever and flipping a switch. That's where we're trying to get our customers to.
Yeah, and I think there's across, if we look in supply chain, certainly more and more real-time visibility, etc. And one of the things as technology improves is driving more regular insights, so that we're working to exceptions and not focusing on annual reviews and that sort of thing. Whether it's compliance on the administrative components of some contractual relationships, or whether it's ongoing getting insights into what's happening. Yeah. So that. David, jumping back to you, are you seeing a change in the way that procurement is viewed in the organisation at the executive level, given recent supply chain, disruptions in the marketplace, and how does the procurement function and the people on this call contribute more, both tactically and strategically, in ensuring that we have compliance through whether it's a business risk perspective, suppliers, or it's a financial etc. And that's really come to the fore in this pandemic.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a great question. I know within the procurement industry, we've seen ourselves as a strategic function for a longer period of time than potentially other people outside of the industry. And I think if anything has happened through this crisis, I think it's actually given procurement a platform to sort of demonstrate that we can be strategic and we are doing strategic activities and not focusing on the operational. So I think that has been happening, but I think that during a crisis like this, that's probably been sped up. But I think the key thing for us is that with being strategic, absolutely, there are roles and there are responsibilities that we do that are strategic, but it doesn't mean that the operational tasks have disappeared. They still exist within our businesses and they still need to be done. And I guess what that's really forced us to do within our group and within our business is actually reevaluate our priorities and reevaluate where we're spending our time. And I guess that for we're not a big procurement team, and I guess that it sort of led us to what are the things that are important to us and what are the things that we can potentially let go. And I guess that's been a mind shift for us as well. But how do we actually use technology better, and how do we use automation better to enable us to focus on more strategic activities than operational activities? So I think that has really come home to us during this period. We can't do everything, so you need to prioritize more. And through this as well, I think the other thing that has become apparent is when we believe we're more strategic, that also comes with a greater level of accountability as well. And so I think what's really important for me and my team is making sure that we can live up to that and making sure that we are delivering on that, rather than talking about the direction that we're heading and we're having to take steps very quickly to get there. But yeah, I'm really excited about it, and I think that especially within our group, I think that we're on a journey, and I think that through this process, I think we'll come out a stronger procurement function than when we went in.
Oh, that's great. And yeah, there's certainly been some unique challenges that will change the way we operate. So that's great. Sue, obviously, in terms of the similar thing of compliance with a lot of your strategic suppliers, and I guess new relationships, how are you managing that, and what are the challenges that are taking up most of your time and resources in your team?
So firstly, I guess I always pride myself on being a strategic sourcing person, not a procurement person. So I like to split that old hair and say that actually I've always been in strategic sourcing and I don't procure anything. The only exception to that has actually been during COVID, and it comes back a little bit to what David said as well. We can't do everything, and I think that part of the value proposition that we have been able to bring and the focus that we've had has been around that old thing that all of us as sourcing or procurement professionals do, is we really do manage relationships. So I think we've been able to utilize those relationships very, very effectively during the COVID timeframe. But the focus for us, whilst we've been busily procuring everything, because Brookfield is so diverse, I think it's the first time I've been asked to source hand sanitizer and actually been, you've turned yourself not to your normal skills, but actually having those core relationships and knowing who you could call and who you could rely on to effectively deliver stuff that was necessary for our office buildings, commercial buildings, for our healthcare and aged care facilities where we're in all different sectors. Relationship thing is key. Having the information, Phil made the point before, data is just really valuable. But the key focus that we've actually spent a lot of time on is that old thing of making sure we are compliant. So we've been using a lot of time to look at modern slavery and risk assessment and how we categorize and manage our supply chain so that we can have a process for review, that we can put in place things that will help us today to be compliant, to know that we've done the work that we said we were going to do, so that, again, acting with integrity, something that Brookfield and all of the organisations on the panel reflect, is we need to know it's so, not just say it's so. And I think that the focus for us has been that combination of risk, compliance, regulation, audit at the same time as just having to get shit done. Excuse my language, it's Australia. But we've really just had to focus on meeting operational, tactical, functional needs to keep business going at the same time as making sure that we are legitimately compliant. So that's the juggling act always that I think we have to manage.
And have you been given much leeway in terms of some of the regular compliance things that may slow things down in the current period, and in order to accelerate that sourcing using your hand sanitizer or those sorts of examples as
I don't think we've been given leeway, Chris. I think there is that acceptance that we are professional in what we do, and that the methodologies that we have used have been as old-fashioned as picking up a telephone and doing the ring around, or asking other people to assist and facilitate us. But I think what comes with that is the reliance on experience and known processes and established workflows have led to a greater visibility and recognition within our business that we have those core capabilities. So I think the flip side has been recognition of the value proposition of that which we do in a circumstance which may never have come to light without the virus. So I think it's enabled us. Perhaps we have more leeway following that because people finally understand the value that comes from some of the processes they perhaps haven't understood putting into place before. So we've kind of turned the tables and actually have been recognised for things that we've always done, but just were never noticed.
Which is great. David, have you had any opportunities to kind of utilise this to refine any of those processes to make yourself more efficient?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's, as you said, we've had to just get things done, and potentially there hasn't been any leeway on compliance, but we've had to expedite those processes greatly. So I think rather than something taking 5 days, we've had to do it in 24 hours or 48 hours. So I think through that, and when you put yourself under that sort of pressure, it stress tests your processes, and it actually brings up some efficiencies that we will look at sort of capitalising on the future as well. So I think, yeah, I mean, we've been working with yourself, Chris, and Coupa, but there's been some great wins that we've had through utilising systems and automating workflows. And through that, we've got a great deal of learnings that I think we may not be able to action right now, but hopefully when there's a bit more clear air in the future, we'll be able to circle back and have a look at how we can improve things moving forward as well.
Yep. Okay, great. Phil, back to you. How should we be measuring suppliers in terms of their resilience, ability to, weather the storms that sort of that we're having across industries, some more so than others at the moment? And how do you start that conversation with your supplier about preparedness, resilience, etc.?
I think actually right now, I think the conversation is easier because people are trying to stay in business, and revenue is super important. I think buyers actually have more control. So I think the conversation is easy. Going back to some of the things that we just mentioned about visibility and assessments, if you can have things like data at your fingertips to tell you if there's going to be an issue and to measure resilience almost in real time, that's going to be key. And that's a place that we're entering now, and our customers are starting to leverage. So we can help with assessments, and you can ask any question you want while you're trying to source PPE. But through some of the risk usage that our customers are enabling now, having data for financial and judicial information, how sound is the supplier's business? How sound is the supplier's supply chain? Scraping, news sentiment and using AI and machine learning. We're giving our customers health scores for their suppliers so they can have some of the easy information at their fingertips, and then reaching out into the community and reaching out through third-party data providers to bring, as I said before, all of that together. I saw an interesting mention from Satya Nadella from Microsoft, MIT Sloan article. He said, because of the pandemic, we've basically covered 2 years of digitization in 2 months. So we've moved super fast. So, and digitization and automation is one thing, but, if you get rid of paper and you don't have the data to provide that, then that data is going to be key. So if I pick some of the large global customers as examples, they have the ability to see, as I mentioned before, what's going on in the news, their financial strength, if there are any compliance or screening issues, depending upon which country they're operating in. We've got customers bringing in data from EcoVadis for sustainability or FRDM for child labor and modern slavery right into the supplier profiles. We have a team that's collected over the last several years, diversity and inclusion data around the globe. And all of that, as well as new partners that we're lighting up on behalf of our customers, all of that's going to be living in one world. So it's one thing to ask the supplier for something and to measure their supply chain of the supplier. But if you have the data at your fingertips, that's going to give, the buyer's going to have that much more control in order to switch or pivot, or, as I mentioned before, turn those spigots up or down as things ease up, or we run into another global issue like we're dealing with today.
Yep. Just while we're rushing through, there was a quick pop-up on the chat, but if you can just get your questions coming through, we'll move into the Q&A in sort of the next 10 to 15 minutes. But I can see we've got sort of one question open at the moment, which I'll come back to now. I guess David and Sue, have you had any instances where you've had to deal with any particular type of compliance issues with suppliers in the last sort of 4 months, specific to COVID, whether it's something that's popped up, and how was that something where you worked through with the supplier? How did you find out about I guess it depends on the nature of the issue. Anything you want to comment on that, either David or Sue?
Not me, no. I can't think of any. So no, I don't have any.
No, I think we've been quite blessed. Our local supply chain, we haven't been too impacted. Globally, we've had a number of issues with factory shutdowns due to COVID, but actually our suppliers have been fantastic, and I think it's been a real testament to some of the relationships that we've had with our suppliers to help us navigate through these last few months. So I think we haven't had too many compliance issues, and I think that's probably off the back of some of the good work that's been done in the past. That Sue said is a lot of that good work and the compliance that was done is now coming to fruition during these times. So sort of, I guess one thing that we've noticed, and it kind of ladders back to that question you had around how is procurement being received within your organisation. I think our suppliers have a number of touch points within our business, and there's a number of different stakeholders that use those suppliers. And I think when C-level want feedback or want to understand how our suppliers are operating and what's happening directly in our supply chain, they don't want to speak to multiple departments. They want to speak to one person who can have cut through with the supplier and get to the heart of it. And I think that's where we've seen a shift in our businesses, that there's been a growing level of reliance on procurement to get that information and bring it back to the business, and also have those commercial conversations with our suppliers to make sure that we can still operate and that they're, we're going to come through the other side as well with these suppliers. So I think that's been a focus. And to Phil's point, a big part of that is to have meaningful conversations. You need to have data, and you need to understand what's going on with those suppliers. So that's been a real big help for us as well, is tapping into that data to be able to have those conversations.
Yep. And coming back to Sue's earlier point, I think if you have good lines of communication with your suppliers, then you address things early before they become issues. So David, in terms of just carrying on the technology, is there anything that you might have had in the last 6 months that would have helped you? I mean, in what you're saying, you haven't had any major sort of compliance breaches through the stresses of COVID, but outside of that, where are you looking to adopt to help manage, whether it's risk or different types of compliance? And where do you see the gaps for yourself that are manual that you'd love to automate?
Yeah, for sure. And I think most businesses are in the same place as us in terms of looking at their modern slavery requirements and looking at compliance as a whole to be able to publish a statement. I think for us, it's a really big bell curve. There's a lot of investment in time and resource and energy to truly understand and to document exactly what's going on within our supply chains. But into automated processes within tools, because you can't sustain that level of investment benefit with resource long term. So I think for us, Phil, you've touched on it a number of different times with the external data sources that are available to you. It's how can you utilize those to make better decisions? For us, there's a need to continue to digitize and automate manual processes that exist within our business. One, so that we've got better visibility of that, but two, so that we can enable work from home and enable this new flexible way of work. I think one of the key things for us around technology as well is that I think the technology of the future needs to be able to take in external data sources as well. I don't know about you, Sue, but we as an organisation have a number of different data sources which are internal within our group. And it's fantastic to have external proprietary tools, but we need to be able to take in information from external sources and have it in one location. Because I know one of the struggles that we have is we've probably got multiple systems that we manage compliance and supply chain across, and I think the focus for us is how we can continue to ingest more data into singular tools to give us one point of view and one view of our supply chain. So I think that's going to be a continued focus for Volkswagen and for the brands moving forward as well.
Yep. And Phil, obviously from the technology side, we've spoken about a number of areas where we're getting, you're seeing people automate and adopt, etc. Are you seeing different trends in different parts of the globe based on, some will be pushed statutory requirements, but the use of technology, are you seeing any trends around?
Yeah, outside of some of the external data and bringing the risk and compliance and spend worlds together, one piece of technology, it's kind of half technology and half people and organizations, is the use of the community. So, whether it's hand sanitizer or PPE equipment, we've had a lot of customers, a lot of our customers and non-customers come to us trying to help them source this. And so we've actually done some of the sourcing of PPE. Our customers have done that together in the community. So it's not just a technology kind of provider one-to-one relationship we've got. A lot of Coupa customers actually have the ability now to start doing things together. And we flip that around as well and leverage what we call community intelligence, which is not so much technology and data, but it's the marriage of those two, where we actually turn back around insights, whether it's risk and health scores or supplier performance that you can't have by yourself or just with a supplier, but cross-supplier. We're starting to leverage that. And we've got things like spend indexes coming out that are leading indicators of the economies around the world. So bringing together technology and this world of buyers and suppliers into one place and turning that back into new data and insights is going to help our customers become more actionable. Whether it's sourcing together and price visibility, or whether it's benchmarking and cycle times, or whether it's doing something like our customers have done in the last several months, which is just trying to get their hands on certain supplies and certain commodities that you normally couldn't do by yourself. So I think the community and collaboration is a kind of an offshoot of technology that a lot of our customers are coming to us for help with, and we're providing some of that. And again, we're not doing that alone. So I think the power of the community is actually going to be a big differentiator in the digital transformation in this space.
Hopefully blending local requirements and knowledge together with global so that we can leverage both dimensions of it in terms of, I know certainly a number of our customers are really focused on supporting local suppliers, especially where they're not-for-profits or NGOs. It's a different dimension around price, but rather supporting local services, etc., and how we bring those through. So not just following a pure technology, price quality aspect. There's a community overlay, which is. Sue, with supply chains especially critical now, what are you doing to protect and preserve Brookfield's supply chain and the relationship with the suppliers?
I think predominantly it comes back to what I said earlier, Chris, in that I think relationship is key. So it's a relationship that goes beyond just the financial transaction. Yes, that might be the net result of the relationship, but fundamentally, you know, you're trying to build those partnerships for the duration, not just of a contract or a purchase order, but it's a supply chain. So I think it's an ongoing thing. It's not something that we see breaking. So I think if you bring it back to the basics, for us, it's understanding and having that relationship from a strategic sourcing perspective, as opposed to just the end user or operational transaction. They just want the widget on their desk. Whereas for us, it's about building an extension of that relationship into an ongoing one. So having those relationships has enabled us to leverage existing suppliers and supply chain, and then introduce new business seamlessly because we already had that. So a good example, again, comes back to PPE. There was a transaction that Brookfield had completed with one of its businesses towards the end of last year in the aged care space. And all of a sudden, as soon as COVID came, we had a requirement for PPE. That business didn't have an established single source supply chain. We, Brookfield, did. We just were able to seamlessly integrate them into an established supply chain to give them an immediate continuity of really essential goods and services at a time where they may have otherwise struggled to do it. So having the framework, having the established processes, workflows, David alluded to it before, you're doing things way quicker than you may have been able to do them before or had a requirement to. So for us, I think we are protecting and preserving those supply chains by the very nature of their establishment, which is at my part of the business, why I always say I'm strategic sourcing is my job is about establishing those partnerships and relationships at an enterprise level, and then the procurement is happening after those are built. And I think the ability to translate the strategy into action, that sounds very buzzwordy, which I'll have to slap myself for afterwards, but the turning those things into reality has been hugely satisfying in that sort of sense, because we have turned something that people don't see into something that all of a sudden, it's like opening the engine. You all of a sudden see what's happening underneath. So I think we've protected them by honouring them. We've continued them by using them. And hopefully that just makes what comes next a lot easier for us as well, whether it's in whatever context it is. It's actually having a chain rather than a rope.
Yep, and showing the process works and it can be scaled and reliable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll probably move on to, I see there's a few questions that have come in, but before we jump into that, there was just a second poll we were going to run around CSR, sustainability, diversion, inclusion, and this particular poll is a multiple choice, so as many guesses as you like for the right or wrong or no right answer. So if we just want to pop up, that should pop up on our screen. I'll just take a minute and then let everyone go forward with that. While we wait for that to come through. So yeah, keen to get everyone's insights, and again, we'll just leave that up for 30 seconds or so, and tick where you see your organisation as relevant. And from there, I'll jump in. I'm just quickly, while we're doing that, having a look at some of the questions that have come in. So I see we've got a couple more now, so that's good. We just want to pop the results up. So we have a little bit more conclusive feedback than on the earlier poll. So supplier management is where the focus is from across the audience, followed by visibility, building in rationalisation strategy, which is a lot of what we're speaking about here. So it's across having that ability to work with our suppliers and then sourcing and digitization and buying sustainably, interestingly, falls into last place. So I'll close that off, and we'll jump on to some of the panel questions. And excuse me if my head looks like it's turning sideways all the time. I'm trying to work off the monitors here. So the first one from Greg, have we seen many global companies embrace traceability and sustainability? Australia is a safe place to deal, but we've seen Australian companies embrace sustainability goals and traceability. So I guess, David or Sue, do either of you want to talk to that in terms of traceability, sustainability? Or Phil, do you want to jump in? Anyone?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, there's a really big drive for us as we move to an electric future from an automotive perspective around sustainability, and I think we're seeing that play out more and more throughout Europe and will make its way down to us in Australia as well. So I think we're in the early stages of looking at what that means for us in Australia, but it's definitely an exciting area around sustainability. And I think even with the manufacturing of electric vehicles requires different minerals and different products that we haven't had to purchase in the past. And I think that's there's a high level of focus on traceability all the way through our supply chain. And that's more on a global supply chain perspective than what I'm responsible for here locally. But I think all of that has a flow-on effect to the way that we operate and the way that we will operate moving forward as well.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, David. The next one from Vanessa. We're having a compliance issue with our contracted supplier for gloves and price inflation with suppliers as they respond. How could any views on how we better manage those instead of just being a price taker? I guess probably this is to Sue's earlier point of, if you've got long-term sustained relationships with some of the suppliers, then to a certain extent you may be a price taker, and how are you supporting them if it's a smaller supplier versus working and having established relationships. So I'm not sure if
Chris, I would add to that. I think it's also about just extending the dialogue, because COVID is a point in time that we're all responding to in our supply chain. I think it is about having a dialogue with them and explaining what the issues are, and more importantly, what the ramifications of those issues might be to the supplier today in the short to medium term, but also long term, that people are evaluating their supply chains, people are looking at what their options might be, guaranteeing continuity of supply and kind of not being held to ransom is one area. But I think the flip side for me, and why I come back to partnership as well, is it's also about not holding people to ransom. If there were no COVID, we would deal with our suppliers in a particular way. And I actually think it's important that we maintain that level of ethics and operation in what we do. So I would say it's about the dialogue with the customer, meeting of the mind, if you like, about what the issues are and the ramifications, and then finding a way forward in typical sort of, mediated outcome that works for both people. Because just like you don't want to be the price, beholden to the price, it shouldn't be about holding them to something that may be unsustainable and they may have issues that you weren't aware of.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of a good point. I think we hear about panic buying happening with consumers in supermarkets, but it also, I can see it happening in organisations as well. And I know with PPE and cleaning and lots of those categories which are directly impacted by the situation that we're currently in. I'd love to see a graph of how many suppliers have entered that category in the last 6 months. So there is a lot of people that are looking to cash in and take advantage of the situation that we're in. And I think there's a lot of organisations that are trying to find suppliers in areas that they potentially didn't have a big spend in as well. So there's kind of like a bit of a power vacuum happening at the moment. And I think that's where I think what we've understood with COVID is that this isn't going away anytime soon. It's going to be here for the foreseeable future. So we're not looking for a solution for 1 or 2 months. We're looking for a solution for the next 1 to 2 years. And I think suppliers and purchasing teams can remind suppliers of that and look to develop, partnerships, which are not just one-off engagements or one-off purchases. So I think there's, as Sue said, how do you broaden the dialogue and broaden the conversation to partnership rather than product?
Yeah, and it becomes an element of trust where if you're working with someone, you know that ultimately they're going to try and do the right thing. There's a couple of questions around how do we sell compliance? Now, I guess depending on whereabouts we're looking at it, whether it's compliance through a purchase to pay process or in suppliers or risk, etc. Do any of you, and Phil, feel free to jump in if you've got any views around this, have how you've sort of looked to sell it? Because I think the second question also just looks at it as being a roadblock. I think what we've heard in the comments to date is that it's a great opportunity to show that processes do work and they don't have to be a roadblock, they can actually be an asset. But certainly any comments on how you internally sell compliance as it starts to come up through your organisation, something like, some of you will have put a lot of work into modern slavery and meeting compliance now. Why do I need to do that, etc. in Australia as an example. So I don't know if you want to comment, one of you, on that.
Sorry, one of the things I think we do is turn it on its head. When there is a lack of awareness or willingness to understand, turn it the other way around. What is the risk of being non-compliant or uncompliant? And actually look at it from the point of view of, and how I think we have been able to demonstrate it, is reputational risk, both at a brand level for our organisation, but as an individual level, and my contribution as an employee. I hold my reputation quite dear, and I know that Brookfield holds its reputation quite dear. So I actually look at it as being, position it the other way around. Not only is there a legislative obligation, currently, let's say modern slavery, to provide a statement, etc., etc. Sorry, a bird just flew in my window. Not just a regulatory obligation, but in fact there is a moral obligation to do those things. And that extends to not just me as an individual, but organisationally. The potential damage that comes from being non-compliant should sell itself. Reputational risk and the brand worth of our organisations in the global sphere is enough to say you invest in the visibility. And in fact, in the case of modern slavery, the thing about modern slavery is it's not saying you will eradicate. I mean, in the Australian context, it's not saying you will have discovered everything in your extended supply chain. It's saying that you will have looked. And I think the obligation is misunderstood because it's very scary words. And the ability to comply is really quite straightforward. I think it is to do with being open to looking and extending that visibility back to the stakeholders who are ultimately accountable as directors of the business to manage and preserve the organisation and individual reputations. Full stop, breathe.
Yeah, as you say, if you embed it in the culture, then if you think something's wrong, it's probably wrong, and you should just speak up and not try and work around it. Just conscious of time and getting to conclusions. So I guess to close off this part of the discussion, I'll turn to you. We haven't heard from Phil for a while, so we'll give him an opportunity to speak up. Phil, do you just want to summarise your thoughts on the area of compliance and where people on this call should be looking to from your perspective? You're just on mute.
I am on mute. You're right. No birds flying in the window, but the mute button is getting in the way. Yeah, just to build upon the last comment. Yeah, if there's a compliance roadblock, I think there's an organizational problem because it's one thing to be offensive in the compliance world, but defensively, you don't want to end up in the newspaper, right? So everyone should be on board with that. And the more data that you've got, the more transparency and visibility, the easier it's going to be compliant. And that I guess if I were to wrap up with one theme, And this is not only working within procurement organizations, but now serving them from the community and the partner side here at Coupa. We do have the ability to take either current issues like finding the right commodities and PPE equipment, or maintaining resilience in the supply chain and making sure you've got visibility into your suppliers and your suppliers. For one company, it could be totally different than others. When I look at sustainability, corporate responsibility, risk and compliance, diversity and inclusion, there are 50 to 70 different domains, subdomains that our customers deal with depending upon where they are in the region. And then when you think about the silos within the organization, you've got finance, compliance, risk, procurement, sourcing, legal, sustainability. It is possible to bring these worlds together, and it's just a matter of getting everyone down at the table. I used to joke in the early days of procurement, about being marriage counselors, getting procurement and AP to sit down at the same table, and you introduce them to each other. You don't report to the same person, but guess what? You can work together. Same thing with sustainability, responsibility, risk compliance, and procurement and sourcing. Everyone can be working on the same screen, at the same table, with the same goals in mind. And we don't have to have separate sustainability reports and sourcing savings target dashboards and procurement metrics and earnings reports. All of those can live in one world. We'll eventually get to a place where there's one button and one screen for that, but we're helping customers bring these worlds together, and it's possible. And it's just starting the conversation, knowing that there's a chance to get there, and there's an end game.
And I'll get the Coupa marketing team to do the marriage counselling video with you. I think there's a couple out there already, so there's a new one for you nominated. Sue, any closing comments?
Sorry, no, I think Phil answered it perfectly well. Okay,
and David?
No, I think there's a real opportunity for procurement to sort of shift that perception of compliance away from a word and make it into more of a culture and a way of doing things. And I think that's a really powerful thing that we can do. But sometimes what we don't do well in procurement or in supply chain is educate and communicate. And I think you've got to keep communicating, and you've also got to change the language and how we speak about this. Don't make it this big scary topic. Make it something that's approachable and something that's part of the way we do business.
That's a great summary. Okay, I'm just conscious we're running out of time. Thanks very much to the speakers today for your time, and hopefully they were useful. I think there's just one question we didn't get to, which we'll respond to offline. Otherwise, thanks to SIPS, and I'll hand back to Sharon to close out.
Terrific. Thank you, Chris, and many thanks everyone for joining us, especially the panel today. Yes, it is all about language, so thanks for that, David. I've definitely got a new definition for procurement and supply management thanks to Sue. Strategic sources who get shit done, and also, I suppose, facilitate relationships, a way that's akin to marriage counselling. It sounds like a superhero to me. Special thanks also to our sponsors today, Coupa and FourPL. Our moderator, Chris, thank you. Participants, David, Sue and Phil, thank you. And to all attendees, we hope you really found it as interesting as I have today and really thought-provoking. Just remember, when you exit today's webinar, there is a post-webinar survey, and we need your feedback to make these even better next time. So also, as Chris mentioned, there'll be a copy of the webinar and list of unanswered questions. So if we didn't quite get to your question today, we'll email them next week. So do not fear, we will answer them. And most excitingly, our next webinar is going to be on the 11th of August, and the topic is construction procurement post-COVID-19. And this is brought to you by the Auckland SIPS crew. So this event will be open to everybody across the globe, and the content and learnings will be taken from a New Zealand perspective. So really, really great session to come. So make sure you register for that and book it in the diary. January. We've got lots more webinars to come over the coming weeks, so look out via our SIPS events email, and also just keep connected on the LinkedIn post, because that's the most important place to find up-to-date, up-to-the-minute information. But for now, please stay safe and keep well. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, Sharon.